Imagine this, you walk into a real location. No set design, no big art department, no controlled studio environment. Just a working space with its texture, its personality, and your job is to make it look good. That's what narrative style commercials are all about. Telling real stories with what's already there. In this video, I'm breaking down how I shot a narrative-driven commercial for a local barbershop, part of a Foot Locker campaign, and the exact thought process I used to turn a functional space into a story-rich visual experience. Because when you're working on a real location with real people and limited time, it's not about inventing something from scratch. It's about seeing what's already there and making it mean something. For this commercial, we weren't just filming a barbershop or somebody cutting hair. We were telling the story of someone who gave up their professional basketball career to chase their true passion, which was cutting hair. This hit home for me and something that I can really relate with because I made the same leap when it came to my cinematography career. So for me, this project wasn't just about getting nice shots in a location and just making it work. It was about capturing the spirit of someone who risked comfort for their purpose that they believed in. Someone who shows up every day to do what they love. And I feel like that's something beautiful, and I need to live up to that when it comes to capturing something. And that's the emotional core I wanted to reflect in the look and feel of this piece. Something that I really wanted to focus on when it came to telling the story. And my favorite tool to communicate any creative idea for look and feel, or just to really get anything on a visual reference, is Frameset. Frameset is a collection of movies, music videos, and commercials that really let you dive into really getting references for whatever you want to do. So when I'm aligning on a look and feel, especially when it comes to something narrative, with also Frameset's new layout that I absolutely love, I am going to type in exactly what I'm looking for. When I'm looking for any visual reference, it can be hard to find somewhere to start, but it's really simple. I'm just going to look up barbershop. And then this is going to give me a bunch of references that I can kind of look at and really dive into, but really relate to what I'm actually shooting. I'm not going into something that is supposed to feel moody or super commercial. I am going into something that is very natural and glowy. So that's what the reference that I'm looking for. And with Frameset's filters, I can really dive into whatever I'm looking for. When it comes to storyboards or really communicating ideas, GIFs is the way to go. So I always like to use motion for whatever I'm doing, but not necessarily when I'm just trying to communicate a look and feel. But GIFs are a great way to do that because it gives you the color palette, and it also gives you the motion and kind of the, if you're going for something handheld, something more commercial. And this is what I like to do. And the reference that we're going for that aligns with what we're looking for is this very warmth, very natural, very gritty kind of look and feel. And this is exactly what we're looking for. So I'm going to click on this reference and I can see the exact piece title, and then I can look at everything else. Obviously, this is a little bit more story driven and not, I can tell this is like a long story piece rather than something that we're looking for. This is just a scene in a bigger commercial, and this barbershop scene is what I'm looking for, but that it exactly goes where the feel. It has those fluorescent tubes at the top and then natural sunlight coming in. So this is something that I can easily communicate to the director of saying like, this is what I want to go for, and see his notes as well. And then if I just go back to the tools that you can use to filter out things, there's so many things that you can do here, especially if you're going for something specific. I always like to align of what we're going for, and brightness, temperature, contrast are really great things that you can do. So if I'm looking for something a lot more bright and airy, I'm just gonna put the brightness up to 100%. Obviously, this is a studio shoot and this is a little bit too much. If I find something in between, and this is something for more of a high key look that we're going for, something a little bit more lifted, less gritty, I can easily do that. Usually brightness and contrast are the sliders that I like to do when I'm playing with different things to establish that look and feel. If you're looking to integrate Frameset into your pre-production and creative workflow, check out the link in the description and sign up today. So I want to approach this a little bit differently and go through my thought process when it comes to really looking at a space and diving into everything. We are setting up this scene that our main talent, Jalen here, is cutting a bunch of his client's hair, and we are highlighting the community aspect of this entire barbershop. what his people are about, what he's about, and what he likes to bring forth. So I always like to start off with a big and establishing shot. And when I was under the impression that this was going to be a barbershop, I thought it was going to be a barbershop that we, saw in the references and everything like this. But this is more of a barber studio and presented a lot more challenges, especially when making a, office style thing look good. Obviously, it looks very good and aesthetic for what he's doing and being that professional environment because it's very clinical. But when we think of a barbershop, we think of Black culture, we think of that, retro style, just the community around those things. I wanted to bridge those gaps and kind of bring that creative style for this. A lot of these shots that we're going to be looking at are a combination of the Sony FX3. In this case, this was the Sony Venice. I am going for an evening look, something a little bit more warm that we pushed in post, so I kept everything neutral. So my white balance that I was shooting at was 5600 Kelvin, and that I am at an ISO of 500, which is then going to be my EI. So then it has a dual native ISO, and I bounce between 500 and 2500 just depending on the scene. And then we already planned this and where the sun was going to be, and it was going to be right through these windows. So we already did a scout and the sun was basically setting on this side. So we started at 12 o'clock, so the sun would be constantly on that side of the building. So we had that natural light coming through. The only thing I had to really do is add to that, and that is the light that we have here. And this is, if I kind of did a top down of these windows, we have that natural sunlight coming through and giving me some warmth and everything like that. But it's generally hitting down and not necessarily hitting anything that I want when it comes to subjects' faces. So something I want is something a little bit lower. And then we had the aperture 1000C outside here. And this is set to 100%. And then I warmed this up and I set this to 4000 Kelvin. As you can see, the color difference, especially when it comes to the light coming through here. So this is giving me my streaks of light through here and then everything also through here. We kind of have it going across the whole thing. And this is really funny too, because I want to get into using a lot of more modifiers, mirrors, CSLR reflectors and everything like that. And this mirror was giving us a lot of reflections and bouncing light. You can see that the direction of light is going this way, but it's also bouncing and giving me nice shadows and contrast everywhere else. And then to add to this as well, you can see even the haziness here, we added haze to add to the texture of like the sun was setting and to give you that barbershop feel. That is generally the glowiness that is associated with everything, and it is super nice. And now when we talk about composition, I'm going to kind of do that everything in blue rather than the light, is that we have our barber walking in here, and this excites this movement because I am doing a dolly in. I just didn't want to do a static high angle shot because there's some motion. So how can I, add motion into this? This is just kind of my thought process. I like to generally creep along walls, creep along things, and this was a perfect way to highlight the product here. And this is like subtle, hints to the brand of Foot Locker. So that's exactly what we did here just by placing those. And then we get nice highlights just from our sunlight as well as our light bouncing around here and giving us all that great look that we're going for. When I'm doing these high angle dolly shots, you need a lot of equipment because you're using a wide angle lens and you're pushing in at the same time. And you're usually doing this with risers. So this lens that we're using here is a 12mm Laowa, and this is from their 0D line, which are lenses I love to use, especially when I'm doing these wide establishing shots. And then if I were to draw my camera here, and this is my lens, my field of view is wide. So if I had a regular dolly track of just on a tripod head, it would see everything. And what I'm actually doing is adding a bunch of camera risers that then connect to the dolly track, or in this case, I was just using a cine slider. And these were all by Pro-Aim. You can pick them up on Amazon and everything. This is what I like to use than the standard Mitchell ones because they're toolless, they're quick, easy, and I always bring them on set and they always get me out of a pinch instead of using a ladder. The next shots that we're doing into the sequence is him cutting hair. So we're going to be doing this through a bunch of different ways. If we really think about this is one scene that he's cutting all these different kinds of hair, and then I have to approach this to get different style of shots. So the one thing that we wanted to do is this top-down spinning shot, and then typically if we even go back to the space that we had before, we don't have a lot of room to set up a goalpost setup or anything like that. So what we did is actually use a 2K boom So if I have my big heavy stand over here, and then I used a 2K boom with that big overhead weight, and then boomed out a Sony FX3 with a gimbal. This is a terrible illustration of this, but you can see exactly how we did that, and we bagged the hell out of the stand, as well as had people on it just in case, and then added ratchet straps, and then that gave us our spinning perspective and looking down. And then here you can see how we really build texture, and I can really build interest. I'm looking to add shadow as well as light to this image, just to add everything into that glow. So we have the light on his hand coming from that same light that is in play here, and I really like setting up these one scene commercials or one scene vignettes, is because you only really have to set up the lighting setup once, and then maybe modify things with like small lights or a few fabrics. So we have that 1000C going through the window, as well as the sun helping us out. So we get shadow on him, and then because we have this on an angle, this is giving us our light here and on our subject, and then you can see that light coming in and then being even intensified and bounced off here. And the reason why the light, we don't have any here, is because the light is coming in on an angle, and that is from the sun coming down. So this is really playing up on your location and saying like, hey, I don't have a lot of space, I don't have a lot of crew, I don't have a lot of time. I am going to use the best light that I have available, which is the sun. Always not reliable, because on the scout days and everything, it was rainy, cloudy as well, and this was in the dead of winter, so we also had snow on the ground, so it was a lot difficult to do this. So again, this just gives you that interesting perspective. And then if you're interested in this rig, we actually made a full video on how we got these shots. We did a lot for the spinning of another vignette in this series, but I did the same process to doing that. The only thing, I attached this on a 2K boom instead of a gold post setup. And then this is a big brand hit that we always like to do, is just add some interesting specialty shot. And the way that we did this is not convenient of what I really wanted to do, because of just the equipment and then the nature of the barbershop chair and everything like that, and also the time. It was just us with a bunch of clamps figuring out a bunch of different places. If I really were to do this again, I would use a bunch of small friction arms and a bunch of the heavy duty arms, but this shot gave us that interesting thing. And what I did here, and you can see with all the blurry lines and everything like that, we basically shot everybody getting into the chair with different styles of shoes, obviously to show off foot locker. And then in addition to that, I shot this at regular speed, so this would be at 24 frames per second, and then I did this at a 1/48. This would give me some motion blur, but not a lot. And then what I did is I did some slow shutter by dropping it down to 1/1/8. And this gave me transitional points, and because the shoes aren't moving, and then I just had my subject just sitting there, it gives you a lot of blurriness, just a different style of shot, so you can transition out. And that's why I like to add into a bunch of tenfold work, as well as my work, those flashy transitions, just to move the narrative forward, because we're sitting in this one chair the whole time. How can we move on time in an interesting way without really changing the lighting or anything? And I like to do that with camera effects as well as camera movement. And then this is just me moving in with tights and on a handheld. So we shot these more other shots rather than the wide angle ones that you see. We shot these on the Zeiss Super Speed Mark IIIs, and I love these lenses because of the natural look that you get. So this is just me shooting off speed at 48 frames per second. You can do this at 60. I feel like 60 is a little bit too much if I'm going for something that is to feel a little bit more elevated, a little bit more slowed down, but not too much. I always like to go to 48. This is just my go-to. And then I'm shooting on an 85mm here. And then these lenses go down to T1.4, but I was generally shooting on a T2 to 2.8. And that's what's generally I like to do, because it gets a little bit too smushy and a little bit too much when it just comes to these lenses. So what I'm doing here is the classic frame within a frame when making something really interesting or composing. This is him with his razor or cutters up here, and then he's cutting the subject's hair, and then I'm framing him within that, and then you can see that natural catch light that we get from the window. So I'm constantly putting myself on the shadow side and really deciding where I want to shoot that because of this light coming in through here. So he's getting lit from two directions right now. One, the sun through that big window, and then if we go back to the wide, we see that our 1000C is in this window over here. So that is what's giving me my edge light, and then popping him out from the background here and adding some detail back there. So I'm just constantly staying on that one side, but looking for interesting ways to tell the story, as well as to get his personal touch on that too, rather than just doing all these specialty shots. The last thing I want to talk about here is how you really play out a sequence with the intention of what the director wants. In this case, the directors wanted a POV of the mirror. You know, when you ever finish a haircut, you and your barber take off the apron, you look in the mirror, you know, you start to feel yourself. And at that point, this is something that's super important for Jalen. This is super important for our character, because this is why he has a passion for haircutting. This is what we established in the interview, and figuring out the exact narrative that this was going to be a huge piece. He feels good of making people feel good, and that is the experience that I share even with my barber when I get my hair cut. So what we like to do in these scenarios is you need to shoot this multiple times with multiple different characters to give you that montage aspect with the same frame, so you're cutting back to what's changing in frame, and that is going to be the experience of our client here. So if we kind of look at this, how I kind of have it laid out, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the way that I cut this together is that we start with the apron off, then we go into the next frame and he takes it off, and then we see him start to lean into frame, and then this guy poses and this guy leans into the frame. So what I can do is I can just have one character just act out all these motions, but if I do that with more intention and I cut between all these multiple different people, this gives me that more interest, something constantly changing in frame. And then we go into, you know, you always have to dap up your barber. So at the end, you know, I go with him, back to him, and then with the kid looking into camera, kind of finish it off to really see the impact that he's doing this across generations of people too. Because that was super important for the directors, that they said, in terms of having the kid and then having a diverse cast of people as well. And then when we just talk about the look of this, I'm just going to make one of these frames bigger. And when we talk about lighting this and everything that we were looking at before, I am using the same exact setup, and I just like to use this frame because this kind of defines like the characteristics. And what I really like about this scene is that we have our barber in the back, and then our hero talent and what he's supposed to feel like. This is the focus of the experience, and we have a lot going on here. So again, we have that natural sunlight just coming in here, and then I accented that with the 1000C, and this is setting at 4000 Kelvin at 100%. And this was just blasting all day, and this is giving me my nice edge and wrapping the light necessarily around his face. If I was just doing this with sunlight, this would only be an edge, and what I was doing with the 1000C is bringing that around and making that a little bit more wrappy. It's still harsh, it still gives me that natural look. This isn't necessarily commercial, because then when we look at the subject, yes, he's popped out from the background with that edge light, which is a little bit softer. And what I really like about this is that we have that natural, you know, sunlight looking feel, that glowiness back here, but on him it's a little bit less of a contrast ratio. This is more naturalistic. Sorry, this is a little bit more commercial, still on the naturalistic side, but not as heavy. But then you can see the direction of that light coming down, how it's not necessarily hitting his face and hitting the back. There's just a lot going on here that just adds to the frame that just feels natural. Nothing feels too lifted. I could easily added a key light here to wrap it around, or a bounce, but I was liking the look of this, and I know that I didn't really need to add anything because this is the look and feel that we're going for. So again, when you're shooting these commercials, when it comes into one scene, these are kind of the ones that I really like, because I generally set up my lights outside or just my big lighting setup and communicate that to my team, and then I'm just playing around and shooting with a bunch of different angles, and we're not moving with a bunch of different spaces. So when you're doing that, think of creative movements in terms of top down, spinning shots, wide dollies, attaching the camera in any really direction or things that you can think possible. Shoot on wide lenses, shoot shoot on tight lenses. Don't do that walking in medium and then just float around with the camera the whole time, because then you'll just get into the edit and try to cut it together and it doesn't make sense. Shoot at different frame rates. Try different creative styles. This is kind of everything I have in my toolkit, and I just threw it at it and it cut together and worked perfectly for us. If you're interested in some of these other videos where I go break down my thought process, especially when covering something that is more naturalistic, more narrative, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to read through them. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video.